All right, let's dive into the strange, upside-down world of Samuel Butler's Erewhon. Now, if you're getting ready for your book club, think of this as your secret weapon. We're going to break down all the key ideas so you can walk in and lead a really fantastic discussion.
So, here's our game plan. We'll start by following our narrator's crazy journey into this hidden land. Then, we'll get into what the author, Samuel Butler, was really trying to do. From there, we'll dig into the heart of the satire, their totally bizarre way of life, their strange institutions, and the secret god they all worship. And we'll wrap it all up with some big questions to get your discussion rolling.
Okay, so first things first. Before we can even get to all the wild satire, we have to talk about the setup. And what's so interesting is that the book doesn't start off feeling like a stuffy philosophical text. Nope, it kicks off like a classic, rip-roaring Victorian adventure story.
We have our narrator, right? He's a young sheep farmer in a new colony, and he gets completely, almost dangerously obsessed with crossing this mysterious mountain range that everyone says is impassable. He's dreaming of fame and fortune, the usual stuff that drove those 19th century explorers.
But the very first sign that something is just off comes from his local guide, a man named Schaubach. When our narrator tries to get him to talk about what's over the mountains, Schaubach just clams up. Instead, he does this incredibly weird and frankly terrifying silent performance. It's like some kind of ritual that just screams unspeakable evil lies that way.
So of course, the guy runs off terrified, but our guy presses on alone. And when he finally makes it through the pass, this is what he finds waiting for him. A huge, horrifying circle of giant statues with these awful twisted faces. And get this, their heads are hollowed out, so the wind blowing through them creates this constant, creepy, moaning sound. It's basically an ancient supernatural alarm system meant to scare the life out of anyone who dares to enter.
So you might be asking, why this incredibly spooky, elaborate setup? Well, it's because that whole adventure story is really just a Trojan horse for the author's big ideas. To really get Erewhon, you've got to understand what Samuel Butler himself was trying to pull off.
You see, Erewhon didn't just spring into existence overnight. It actually grew out of articles Butler wrote over almost 10 years while he was, believe it or not, a sheep farmer in New Zealand. The most famous one, Darwin Among the Machines, became the blueprint for one of the book's most memorable chapters.
Now here's a really important point to bring up at your book club. Butler himself went out of his way to say he was not making fun of Darwin. He actually admired him a lot. What he was doing was exploring what he called the specious misuse of analogy, basically showing how you can take a perfectly good idea like evolution and twist it into something completely absurd if you follow it to an illogical extreme.
And this is a great little tidbit for your group. Even the author admitted the plot was kind of beside the point. He called the book Not an Organic Whole, which is a fancy way of saying, hey, the story is really just a clothesline I'm using to hang up all my satirical essays and weird thought experiments.
Okay, so with all that in mind, let's get to the central joke of the entire book. See, the land of Erewhon, which, if you haven't noticed, is just nowhere, spelled almost perfectly backward, is a place where all of our most basic social and moral values are turned completely on their head. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. In our world, right, if you commit a crime, you get punished. If you get sick, you get sympathy. Well, in Erewhon, it's the total opposite. They see crime as a kind of disease that needs therapy. But if you get a physical illness, that's a moral failure. That's a crime, and you're going to prison for it. This completely bizarre logic is shown in one of the book's most famous scenes. The narrator watches a man get put on trial, with a judge and jury and the whole shebang. And what's his crime? Not theft, not murder. His crime is that he got tuberculosis. And he's sentenced to hard labor for life. It's just wild.
So if you do commit a crime, say you embezzle some money, you don't go to jail. No, you're sent to see a straightener. Think of them as a kind of therapist for your soul. And their treatments could be anything from a weird diet to, I kid you not, a series of floggings, which the patients gladly accept to be cured of their, criminality.
And their view on technology is the other big satirical piece here. Hundreds of years ago, some philosopher took Darwin's ideas and ran with them. He argued that machines were evolving, would one day become conscious, and would eventually overthrow humanity. And the Erewhonians were so freaked out by this idea that they destroyed every machine invented in the last 271 years. So as you can imagine, this completely backward logic seeps into everything, especially the pillars of their society. Butler has a ton of fun satirizing their versions of education and religion.
For example, their universities are literally called the Colleges of Unreason, and their purpose isn't to teach you useful skills. It's the exact opposite. They teach things like a hypothetical language and pride themselves on making sure their graduates are totally, completely, and utterly unprepared for the real world.
And Butler's attack on organized religion comes through in what he calls the musical banks. Picture these huge, beautiful cathedral-like buildings that everyone is expected to go to and support with their money. But, and this is the key, everyone kind of quietly agrees that the currency and the teachings from these banks have zero actual value in their everyday lives.
So, if the official gods of the musical banks are just for show, what is it that really runs the show in Erewhon? What's the force that people actually listen to and obey? Well, our narrator starts to figure out that there's this other, unspoken goddess in Erewhon. She has no temples, no priests, nobody even really talks about her, and yet she is the one pulling all the strings, dictating every single decision people make, big or small.
Her name is Yidgrin, and this, right here, is Butler's satirical masterstroke. Yidgrin is an anagram for Grundy, as in Mrs. Grundy, who was a famous character in plays at the time, a symbol for the tyranny of social pressure, that constant, nagging fear of what will the neighbors think.
So here's the real kicker. While the Erewhonians all pretend to worship the gods of the musical banks, their actual religion, the one they practice every single day, is the worship of public opinion. Even the bank managers who preach against Yidgrin are secretly her most terrified and obedient followers.
Okay, so we've taken a pretty wild trip through this land of logical nonsense. How do we wrap this all up? Well, here are the main ideas you can really sink your teeth into for your book club conversation.
First off, it's super clear this isn't just a fantasy story. It's a direct, sharp, and often hilarious critique of Victorian England. Butler was taking shots at everything his society held sacred. Its strict moral codes, the Church of England, the old-school universities, and most of all, that suffocating pressure to conform. And to leave you with the final big question for your discussion, and really this is the one that matters most. This book was written over 150 years ago, but the satire still feels so sharp, it's almost scary. So the real question is, what parts of our own world today, if you just tilted your head and looked at them a little differently, are just as illogical, just as hypocritical, and just as completely upside down as anything you'd find in Erewhon?